It is it's so incredibly easy to feel like our entire lives are just lived inside this really noisy, crowded
Yeah,
room.
absolutely.
Right, like from the very moment you wake up, you're just bombarded. You've got notifications buzzing on your nightstand, the expectations of your family, the roles you have to perform at work.
All those labels you wear in your
Yeah,
community. Eh?
exactly. You are just constantly navigating how other people perceive you. But today, for this deep dive, we're taking you completely out of that realm.
It's a huge shift.
Yeah, we're stepping entirely outside the human social archive, leaving that heavy door of society behind. And, well, we're walking out into the woods.
It is a profound psychological shift because we're really looking at what happens when that constant low-level hum of human perception simply, you know, stops.
Right. And the frameworks we're examining today, they propose a premise that really just catches you off guard. Like, what if the truest, most authentic version of yourself isn't actually found within a supportive community?
Right, or a carefully chosen label.
Yeah, or any human social structure at all. What if your truest self is actually waiting for you out in the wild, completely alone?
It's a fascinating question.
It really is. So, we're looking at two incredible sources today that tackle this from different angles. One explores this radical framework for understanding gender through the natural world, which is a concept called exotic gender. And the other is a text called Sovereign Wild, which looks at the historical and structural ways women's independent access to that unmediated nature has been restricted.
And, these concepts fundamentally challenge the default way modern humans think about identity
Mm.
because we're conditioned to view identity as this uh, communication tool.
Like a shorthand.
Exactly, a shorthand we use to explain ourselves to the group.
Hmm.
But these frameworks ask us to consider identity as an internal physical resonance instead.
So let's jump straight into that first concept, exotic gender. Now, it's crucial to establish the specific definition the author is using here because the framework doesn't use exotic to mean like a foreign country or a tropical vacation.
Right, not at all.
It means exotic in the sense that it originates from a climate that simply does not exist on our current cultural map. Like it operates on a baseline of nature rather than a baseline of human society.
Think about the contrast there. In human society, everything is heavily categorized, right? It's labeled, debated, put into a hierarchy.
Always.
But in the natural world, those mechanisms just do not exist.
Yeah.
The trees don't have pronouns.
Yeah.
The river doesn't, perform its fluidity for the approval of the rocks.
Mhm.
A storm doesn't wait for a consensus or a committee vote before it breaks. It just is.
It exists in this state of pure, unapologetic being. To help visualize the mechanics of this, I want you to think about your smartphone right now.
Okay.
Usually, we define a smartphone's entire existence by its connection to the network.
Right, the apps it runs, who you're texting.
Exactly. The algorithms feeding you content, how many likes you get. Its purpose, in our minds, is entirely social and communicative.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take that phone and you walk deep into the woods, like miles away from any cell tower, and you drop the Wi-Fi signal completely.
The phone doesn't vaporize.
Right. It doesn't vaporize. It just exists as physical hardware in a physical space. And the author's argument here is that our bodies work the exact same way when we unplug them from the social network of human gender categories.
We don't disappear.
No, we just switch from software to hardware.
What's fascinating here is how this framework completely bypasses the brain's default mode network.
Oh, right. The part responsible for self-reflection.
Exactly. Self-reflection and social cognition.
Mm-hmm.
When you are constantly perceived by others, your brain is running this translation software. Like, how am I standing? How is my voice pitching?
Am I conforming to the expectation of my gender?
Right. And this framework suggests that when you remove the social gaze, that software just shuts down. The text argues that nature is unmistakably gendered, but not in the binary performative sense. It's gendered in a purely somatic sense.
Meaning it's entirely about the physical, felt experience in the body, right?
Yeah.
Rather than the intellectual categorization in the mind.
Exactly. It's a pre-linguistic, pre-political knowing. It's just the raw data of existence. The author describes it as something that arrives through the soles of your bare feet standing on cold earth.
Oh, I love that imagery.
Yeah, it happens long before your cognitive brain can formulate a neat little word for it.
Mm.
When you treat nature as a somatic teacher, not just like a pretty aesthetic backdrop for a hike, your body processes identity as a field rather than a fixed point on a chart.
It becomes fluid.
Fluid, seasonal, responsive. Sometimes the author says this feeling is expansive and diffuse, like a spring marsh. Other times, it's concentrated, sharp, and precise, like the attention of a hunting hawk.
A spring marsh or the sharp attention of a hawk. I mean, that is about as far removed from the standard checkboxes on a medical form as you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
It's just a totally different way of moving through the world.
It really abandons the need for human vocabulary entirely. And that brings up the core critique, this framework levels, at our dominant conversations around gender today.
Right.
Because even the most radical, boundary-pushing gender theories right now, they're still fundamentally oriented toward legibility.
Yes, they're still asking, like, how do you want to be seen?
Or how can you be read correctly by the people around you?
Right.
You are still digging through the dictionary to find the right language so the community can locate you.
And validate you.
Right. But exotic gender stops all of that and asks, what did your body know that language hasn't caught yet?
Okay, let's unpack this, because I need to push back intellectually on this premise for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because humans are biologically, evolutionarily a pack species.
Mhm.
Like, our nervous systems are wired to co-regulate with other humans. Solitary confinement is literally used as a severe punishment because our brains deteriorate without social mirroring.
That's true.
So if an identity requires no flag, no pronouns, and no community of recognizable others to validate it, how is that an identity at all? Doesn't that risk feeling incredibly incomplete? Or, honestly, just a recipe for profound isolation and loneliness? If identity is just me in the woods, how is that not just basic survival? Doesn't identity inherently require an echo?
That is the exact friction point where most people recoil from this concept.
Yeah.
We are terrified of the void where social validation usually sits.
Yeah, exactly.
But the framework counters that fear by introducing the concept of pure individuality. The author's argument is that solitary confinement is destructive because it strips away the pack while leaving you in a barren cage.
Oh, it's a sensory void.
Exactly. The forest, however, is not a void. It is a hyper-complex, densely populated network. So when you step out of the human pack and into the wild, the echo you're looking for doesn't disappear, it transfers.
Wow.
You're no longer co-regulating with human expectations. You're co-regulating with the environment.
So the environment literally becomes the mirror.
Yes, the expression doesn't need to be translatable to another human to be valid. It is already whole. It isn't incomplete just because it lacks social confirmation.
Right, it's entirely private.
Entirely embodied and entirely yours. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't actually a new concept. The sources ground this idea in historical and spiritual contexts.
Yeah, looking at shamanic and two-spirit traditions, right.
Correct, across various indigenous cultures globally. In many of these frameworks, the texts point out that certain bodies stood outside the standard binary of the village. They weren't just, tolerated variants. They were cosmologically functional.
They had a distinct vital purpose.
Exactly. They stood outside the binary precisely so they could face the forest and mediate between the human world and the non-human world.
They were the designated bridge between the village and the wild.
But the exotic gender framework goes a step further than even that historical context. It argues that this specific somatic experience doesn't even ask to be cosmologically useful to the village.
It's not trying to be a bridge.
No, it's not trying to be a mediator for anyone else. It just wants to be left alone long enough to find out what the body actually is, when all the noise of human expectation permanently stops. The proposition is simply this: it never needed a word. It needed a forest.
But wait, if the forest is the only place we can truly find this unmediated, authentic self, what happens if society structurally prevents you from walking into that forest alone?
Ah.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that question forms the exact bridge to our second source, Sovereign Wild.
Yes, it does.
This text explores how access to that unmediated nature has historically been restricted, heavily policed, or filtered, specifically focusing on the experience of women.
Which introduces a vital structural layer to this entire conversation, because finding yourself in the wild operates on the massive assumption that you are permitted to access the wild freely and safely in the first place.
Exactly. The concept introduced here by the author is called nature independence. It defines a relationship between the feminine and the natural world that predates any heterosexual relational need. It's an ancient sovereign freedom.
Yes, one that existed long before the question of male accompaniment was ever relevant to the equation. And the text describes this so beautifully as living in the body's memory of rain.
That's such a striking phrase.
It really is. It's talking about the physiological shift, like the way a woman's nervous system exhales differently when she is completely, truly alone in the woods, unobserved.
It's the capacity to be in full, direct relationship with the natural world without requiring a mediating presence. We aren't talking about experiencing nature alongside someone else. We're talking about nature as the primary relationship.
But the text argues that contemporary culture has handed us this massive structural inheritance that actively prevents this direct relationship.
Right. Women's access to wild is almost entirely filtered through male accompaniment.
Think about all the cultural tropes.
Yeah.
You have the male hiking partner who navigates the trail, the protector who comes along to make the outdoors feel permissible.
Or the idea that a woman alone in the woods is inherently a true crime podcast waiting to happen.
Yes, exactly that trope. The author's argument is that women are systematically trained from childhood to experience natural environments as inherently dangerous without a male presence.
Instead of viewing nature as sovereign territory that they belong to by right.
Right. Society frames the wild as a threat to be managed by a proxy rather than a companion to be embraced directly. Imagine being told that you are allowed to view a breathtaking, ancient masterpiece of a painting in a museum.
Okay.
But there's a massive catch. You are only ever allowed to look at this masterpiece through the viewfinder of someone else's camera. You're
Oh.
never allowed to just stand in front of the canvas with your own two eyes, breathing the air in the room, letting the scale of the art just wash over you directly. That is what this structural inheritance does to a woman's relationship with the natural world. It enforces a constant mediating lens.
And not only is it someone else's camera, but that camera has a filter on it that alters all the true colors of the painting. The person holding the camera is constantly whispering in your ear, telling you where to look, what is safe to approach, and what you should be afraid of. The direct transmission of the environment is entirely blocked by the mechanics of the mediation.
So the obvious question becomes, what happens when you remove that scaffolding? Like, what happens when you drop the camera, walk away from the guide, and just look at the woods with your own eyes?
According to the text, when that mediating presence is gone, the physiological reaction isn't panic.
No.
Something much older activates.
Yeah.
The senses sharpen in a completely different register.
Mhm.
And crucially, the author points out that this sharpened state isn't loneliness. It is a profound, active listening,
Yeah, a quality of sensory attention.
right? One that group dynamics, no matter who is in the group, naturally suppress. Because group dynamics require you to monitor the people around you.
Always.
This raises an important question. Where, historically, has this unmediated solitary feminine power actually lived?
Right.
Because we don't often see it celebrated in the centers of civilization or domestic life.
No, we really don't.
The text answers this by mapping out what it calls the spatial grammar of feminine sacred power. When you look at goddess traditions across various ancient cultures, this specific type of power is consistently located in the wild.
And specifically at the extreme margins of cultivated order, it lives off the edge of the map.
Exactly. Look at Artemis in Greek mythology. Her domain is the deep, impenetrable forest. She isn't chasing her prey through the populated city squares.
Right.
Or look at the Morrigan in Celtic lore. She is a goddess of war and fate, but her spatial grammar places her over the battlefields. She's not standing in the ranks conforming to the rules of human conflict.
She takes the form of a raven, observing from the sky, entirely sovereign.
Exactly. Or Oya in Yoruba tradition, who commands the raw kinetic energy of the unpredictable storm, the cemetery gates, the wild winds.
She doesn't rule the hearth fire in the domestic household.
No. The spatial grammar of their power is inherently outside of human control, human domesticity, and human mediation.
They rule the elements that the village simply cannot tame. And bringing this back to you, the listener, navigating the modern world today, the text connects this ancient spatial grammar to what it calls modern rememberings.
Right.
When we see women today engaging in things like solo hiking, cold water swimming in the ocean, forest bathing, or outdoor moon-based practices,
These aren't just hashtags on social media?
no, they aren't just weekend wellness trends. The framework positions these acts as literal rememberings of that older, unmediated relationship. It's a reclamation of spiritual and physiological space.
It is the nervous system demanding to return to its original baseline.
Ah,
It's the body saying, I need to remember what I am when I am not being perceived.
I think that distinction is vital. It elevates a solitary walk in the woods from just a nice hobby to a profound act of historical reclamation. But there's a really crucial caveat that the source makes here, and we definitely need to highlight it.
The clarification of intent.
Yeah. When the text talks about this nature independence being quote unquote without men, it explicitly states that this is not about antagonism. Right.
This isn't born from a wound, and it's not some political statement or a reaction against men. The author writes that it is without men, in the same way that the act of breathing is without permission.
Nature never waited for anyone to approve the entry.
Exactly. It doesn't factor the human power dynamic into the equation at all. As the text simply and powerfully puts it, she just went.
She just went. It entirely removes the human social architecture. It is a return to a baseline where human social structures, whether that's patriarchy, gender expectations, the need for a village, or just the anxiety of a modern city, are rendered completely, utterly irrelevant.
The wind does not care about your social standing.
And the cold water does not care about your labels.
So what does this all mean? When we take these two deep conceptual frameworks together, what is the ultimate takeaway for you as you move through your day? Well, both of these texts, Exotic Gender and Sovereign Wild, they are fundamentally arguing that to find the absolute truest sense of our own bodies, our identities, and our personal power, we have to occasionally strip away all the human mediators. We have to consciously drop the Wi-Fi signal.
Yes. Whether that mediator is a rigid vocabulary of labels that we're desperately trying to fit ourselves into so society can read us, or a physical companion that culture tells us we need in order to be safe outdoors.
The core message is that your body already knows what it is.
It already possesses its own wild, highly specific nature, but the noise of the room is just drowning it out. It can only access that deep somatic knowing when it is placed in right relationship with the wind, the water, and the stone.
It doesn't need to be seen by anyone. It just needs to be.
Exactly.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on these frameworks, but looks at the trajectory of where we are heading right now.
Okay.
If it is true that our deepest identities, our clearest senses of self, and our sharpest physical intuitions are unlocked specifically by stepping entirely out of human social structures and into the solitary wild, how does our increasingly virtual, indoor, and socially hyper-connected modern world literally change who we are capable of becoming?
Oh.
If the body biologically requires the forest to truly know itself, are we losing entirely new categories of human experience simply because we no longer go outside alone?
That is a haunting and truly necessary question to sit with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really encourage you to take some time today, put the phone down, step out of that noisy, crowded room, take a walk outside, and just listen. Because maybe out there in the woods, without an audience and without a guide, the truest version of yourself is just waiting to be remembered.